This is the Sony FX30. I've had it for about 6 months. Here's my review. So let's start with the good things. There's a bunch of features on this that I like compared to something like the A7 IV that we're shooting on now that is a little bit different, and it does make shooting on a camera like this just better. So in no particular order, I like the fact that there are multiple record buttons on this camera. We have the one on the front, one on the top, which is nice and big and lights up. And then obviously we also have the shutter button, which is also quite nice, which I'll actually mention a little bit later as well. Linked to the record buttons, we also have the tally lights. So when you do hit record, not only does the button itself light up on the top, you also have a tally light on the top on the back and actually on the front corner. So that's really handy, and it's really easy to tell when you're recording, so you're never wondering. Another more unique feature about the FX30 and the FX3, they both have this, is the main menu. When you first go into the menu, you have a main 1 and a main 2 menu, which is much more video focused than the regular menus in the other Sony Alpha cameras. Now, this camera still has all of that menu, but then it additionally has this main menu, which they have started implementing in some other cameras. So it's sort of a thing they're gradually doing, but it is really good to be able to just access like all the settings that you'd need to for video, more so than like the function menu. Another really good thing about this is the fact that it does have a built-in fan, so it like never overheats. It doesn't even really get hot. The Sony A7 IV that I'm shooting on now does get quite warm. This, because it has a fan in it, it just doesn't even get warm. So that's really nice, especially when we're shooting in summer in Australia. Right now it's quite hot, especially with these lights on. With the body in general, it is built more for video, so it has buttons that are already set by default to more specific video features, like you've got your zebras, your peaking, and then you also have buttons on the top which by default do certain things, but I'll talk about the exposure in a minute. The I/O doors on the side for like HDMI, USB, and the mic and headphone jacks, the doors are actually quite nice compared to the other Sony Alpha cameras, where they're a little bit more of like a hybrid hard soft rubber sort of thing, whereas these are just solid plastic, same sort of material as the actual like outside of the body itself. So they just feel a lot more solid, and in general the body just feels more solid than the other Sony Alpha cameras or camera that I've used, the A7 IV. Another thing I like about this is the dual base ISO and the fact that it has Cine EI, and I only use Cine EI. I haven't even shot flexible ISO. I have my ISO button set to switch between the two base ISOs, so it's really easy to just shoot at 800 or 2500, and I don't really shoot at anything else. And the last big benefit that I will mention is the audio handle, which I don't actually have here because it's on my A7 IV right now. One of the things I do like about it is that it can just be used on any Sony camera with a multi-interface shoe. Now, it's a little bit janky sitting on the A7 IV because there's obviously no screw holes to screw it in like this one has here, but it still works, so that's good. The audio handle is great, so you know I can plug my XLR shotgun mic into it as well as 2 other mics, and it's just so much better than having just a single 3.5mm port. Plus you get a lot more control of the audio as well. All right, now on to the cons. The biggest one that I sort of see as a con, and I know it's not actually really a con, but Super 35. This is an APS-C size sensor. Inherently, that's not a bad thing. As you probably know, a lot of high-end cinema cameras have Super 35 sensors, so it's not like it has to be full frame for it to be good. But because I use a full frame camera in the A7 IV, and I have all full frame lenses, and I'm used to shooting full frame, it just means it's a little bit more work to switch between the two because all your focal lengths will be different. Your lighting can be a bit different. So it would be better to have all full frame or all APS-C sensors. So that's just sort of like a little downside. And I know you can shoot in crop mode on the A7 IV, but why would I only shoot in crop mode just for the sake of matching if I could use a full frame? And the other issue I have with the fact that it is a smaller sensor is, especially when I'm shooting on telephoto lenses. I like telephoto lenses. I have the 7200G Master Mark II. This is the 85-1.8, and it just means that this isn't an 85. This is like 127. So if I wanted more of that like 85 sort of look, I would have to get more like a 50, which I want to get, but that 51.2 is pretty expensive. And it also means you just can't get as wide, or you'd have to buy specific lenses to get particularly wide, like, you know, the 10 to 20 mil or the 11 mil APS-C glass that you can get for Sony APS-C cameras. Whereas I currently only have full frame lenses, and I don't plan on getting APS-C lenses since I plan on keeping mostly full frame and then just sort of, you know, having an APS-C camera here or there. Okay, another downside is I mentioned that the dual base ISO is a great thing, and it is, but the second base ISO is only 2500. So the difference between the first and second base ISO is not even 2 stops. It's 1 2/3 of a stop. That's not even, you know, putting on an ND filter sort of difference, unless you have like a less than 2 stop ND. I'm not saying it has to be 12,800 like the FX30, but 2500 is a little bit lower than I would like. Although I'm pretty sure the Venice has a second base ISO of 2500, so, you know. But if you have a Venice, you probably have tens of $1,000s worth of lights at your disposal as well. One thing that other people have also mentioned with the 4K 100p on this, now I haven't really used it that much because I don't shoot that much slow-mo, and if I do, I'll just shoot it in 50p. But 4K 100 or 4K 120, as well as 1080p 200 or 1080p 240, it can be a bit noisy and you need a lot of light, and it has an additional 1.5 times crop. So it's as if you're shooting on like a micro four thirds sensor and you're getting extra noise. I'm pretty sure it doesn't even oversample. That's probably why that crop is a thing. I don't see it as a huge issue because I don't really need 100 or 200 frames per second very much. So it's not a big deal, but if you do need slow-mo, you're probably better off getting an FX3, A7S III, or even actually the new A9 III that has 4K 120 with no crop whatsoever, because the FX3 still has a 1.1 times crop. This has a 1.5 times crop in addition to the APS-C crop initially. Speaking of frame rates and resolutions, I shoot mostly at 4K 25 frames per second, and I've noticed some weird things when I'm outputting the signal from the FX30 into my Atomos Ninja 5, which I'm actually recording on right now from the A7 IV. Basically what I've noticed, and this isn't the case with the A7 IV, is if you do have internal recording turned on, the Ninja reads it as 50p instead of 25p. I don't know why. If you turn the internal recording off and have it only output by HDMI, it's fine. It'll do 10-bit 422 25 frames per second and 4K. So that's fine. But it just means if you want to be able to record externally and internally, you can't do it at the same frame rate and resolution for some reason. It seems to work fine on the A7 IV, so I don't know what the deal is with the FX30. Maybe it's just a setting that I didn't try changing, but I noticed it was kind of weird. Another thing that's not like a huge con, but because there's no mechanical shutter on this, because it is a video camera, they don't need a mechanical shutter, there's no sensor curtain, so you can't, hold on, can you see the sensor? There you go, there's the sensor. When you take the lens off, the sensor's just exposed, whereas, again, I keep comparing it to the A7 IV just because that's what I have. But with the A7 IV and with other Sony Alpha cameras with mechanical shutter, you can set it to close the shutter when the camera's turned off. So if you want to change lenses with the camera turned off, you're not exposing the sensor to any light or dust or anything. And I'm pretty sure even the A9 III, without having a mechanical shutter, because it has global shutter, it doesn't need one, it still has a sensor curtain. But again, it's not a big deal as long as if you have good practices with changing lenses and not exposing your sensor to dust all the time, it's probably fine. And the last thing I did mention, the audio handle before is great, but it's kind of flimsy, especially for what it is. So I do actually have the small rig extension for it. One, it is very short, so the extension makes it a bit longer, and it puts a plate on top and on the bottom to make it a lot more sturdy. So you can not only mount stuff without worrying about, you know, the handle breaking, and it also just feels better in your hand and is just more sturdy when you're holding the camera. All right, and then some sort of neutral thoughts that aren't really pros or cons. I mentioned about the shutter before and how there is no mechanical shutter. So this camera can take photos, but because there's no mechanical shutter, it just feels kind of wrong because it doesn't make any sound. Like if I switch into photo mode and I'm gonna hold this right up to the mic and take some photos, the only sound there that you can hear is the shutter button being pressed. The shutter button is quite nice. It's a very solid click. So it just sort of feels kind of weird shooting photos on this. One, because it is built more for video, so it doesn't feel like a photo camera necessarily. But yeah, not having that sound or vibration from the mechanical shutter just doesn't feel right to me when I'm taking photos. That being said, I haven't taken many photos with this. It can take decent photos though. It's 26 megapixels, same sensor as the A6700. So it's a solid photo camera if you need it to take photos. It's just not built for it. Speaking of photo features, it also doesn't have a viewfinder, which I do not mind at all. I actually prefer not having the viewfinder. Sometimes the viewfinder can be helpful. It's more so for photos than for video. Like on the A7 IV, I use it occasionally, but very rarely. So I don't mind at all that there is no viewfinder, but some people who use viewfinder a lot, they might think it's a bit of a con. And one thing that I think is kind of novel, but I've never really used it, I think it's a good idea. With the buttons on the body by default, it has certain buttons set to, you know, ISO, white balance, iris, and shutter. And in the default mode for exposure, which is flexible, which kind of makes sense for video, but I've never really used it and I've never heard of anyone else actually using it either. Everyone just uses manual. But if you shoot in this flexible exposure mode, you can set ISO, shutter speed, and iris all either to automatic or manual individually. You don't have to change to a different type of exposure mode. You can just say, I want auto aperture or auto ISO or auto shutter. And you can just do that at any point just by holding the button in. Now, because I don't shoot in that mode, the buttons don't do that. But it is sort of a unique idea. You also can't do that if you're shooting in Cine I. So there's that too. So I just shoot everything in manual mode, and I do have the ISO button set to switch between my base ISOs. I've reprogrammed the iris and shutter buttons to different things because I don't need to do that because I have the dials for them. I did do a whole video on my custom button settings on the FX30. If you are interested, it'll be up here. Now to actually answer the question, who should buy this? Should anyone buy it? And I think yes, people should buy this. It is a great camera. It is significantly cheaper than, let's say, the FX3, which is pretty widely considered an amazing YouTube camera, or even for professionals as well, if you don't want to step up to the FX6. And if you don't know, the movie The Creator, which came out not that long ago, was shot on the FX3 and everybody was talking about it. They shot it on like 7 FX3s because they could afford it. But this is like the FX3 in most ways, except for the sensor. So it's a very solid camera. It's just that sensor is better. I would personally prefer an FX3, but because it is double the price, I ended up getting this instead because I still wanted a second camera that would match well with my A7 IV, and I have been using this as my primary video camera since I got it. I still shoot a fair bit of video on both cameras, but this has been my sort of primary video camera for the most part, unless it's in the shot like it is now. If someone's looking more for a hybrid camera in a similar price range, or actually a bit cheaper, the A6700 has the same sensor and actually some more features when it comes to like the AI stuff, because it has that AI chip that Sony's been putting in their new cameras lately. So it does some things that this can't do. However, this is built more for video, whereas that's more of a hybrid camera. So it more depends what you sort of want. When it comes to a hybrid camera though, I would probably still go for the A7 IV or maybe the A7C II, but probably still an A7 IV. But who I think this is for is people like me that are getting into video and getting serious about video, because you can do video with any camera that can shoot video. But if you want to get serious about video, but you don't have the budget for an FX3, an FX6, or anything else, this is a great camera for that. Or if maybe you do have the budget for one FX3, but you want 2 cameras, get 2 of these instead. I've heard other people recommend that. So that could also be a good idea. But basically anyone that wants to take video a bit more seriously and they want a dedicated video camera, this is a pretty solid option for the price. And it will remain as my primary video camera for quite a while, I imagine. Maybe when Sony releases the next iteration of the FX3 or FX6, maybe that's when I'll upgrade. But for now, this has been the FX30. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Go watch that video, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.